September 3, 1943. The clock read 1847 hours. High above the English Channel, cold air whipped through metal and wire. A modified B-17F Flying Fortress climbed into darkening sky. This aircraft had lifted off from RAF Thurley moments before. The mission ahead would shatter everything the 8th Air Force believed about aerial combat. What was about to unfold went beyond breaking protocol. It meant destroying assumptions about who could fight at crushing altitude. 25,000 feet above Earth. Temperature plummeting to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Enemy fighters would soon appear as dark crosses against an unforgiving sky. The men in this crew had another name for what was coming. They called it the end of everything they thought they knew. This wasn't just violation of regulations. This was complete destruction of military doctrine. The woman manning the waist gun position represented something the 8th Air Force had spent 2 years trying to prevent. But desperate times had created desperate measures. The personnel file sitting on Colonel Richard Patterson's desk told an impossible story. 8th Air Force headquarters in High Wycombe, England, housed many strange documents. But this one challenged military bureaucracy itself. Service number W284719 stared back from the folder. Gunnery qualification scores ranked in the 98th percentile. Combat readiness assessment marked as exceptional. These details created no problems for military administrators. One single line made the entire file a nightmare. Gender: female. Sergeant Ann Fletcher had accomplished something impossible in 1943. She had become the highest-scoring aerial gunner in her training class. Tyndall Army Airfield in Florida had never seen anything like it. Fletcher had outperformed 247 male candidates. The competition included both ground ranges and modified bombers. Training runs over the Gulf of Mexico proved her abilities beyond doubt. The scores couldn't be disputed. Moving target range at Tyndall revealed her extraordinary skill. Fletcher achieved 89% accuracy with the Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Ranges exceeded 400 yards during these tests. The average male graduate scored only 64%. Skeet range performance told an even more dramatic story. This range simulated aerial combat deflection shooting. Fletcher hit 94 out of 100 clay targets. Her classmates averaged just 58 hits. These numbers created confusion among instructors. They had never witnessed such precision from any trainee. But exceptional ability created an impossible problem. Army Regulation 6.15-135 explicitly prohibited women from direct combat operations. The regulation had been established in 1942. Military leadership wanted clear boundaries for female service members. The Women's Army Corps had been created just 1 year earlier. Its design carefully kept women away from front lines. Women could serve as mechanics. They could work as radio operators. Meteorology offered another approved role. Any position supporting combat was acceptable. Actually engaging in combat was absolutely forbidden. Fletcher's situation emerged from bureaucratic chaos, meeting desperate military need. She had enlisted in the Women's Army Corps in January 1943. 12,000 women joined the program in its first 6 months. Fletcher was one among many. Her application listed aircraft mechanic as her occupation. This matched 5 years working at her father's aircraft repair service. The location was Wichita, Kansas. Recruitment officers knew nothing about her true background. She hadn't mentioned certain skills because they hadn't asked. Thomas Fletcher had taught his daughter more than aircraft repair. He had taught her how to shoot with deadly accuracy. Thomas Fletcher carried secrets from the Great War. He had served as aerial observer in the final months of World War I. His aircraft was a DH-4 bomber flying over the Western Front. Combat experience had left him with 3 lasting possessions: A distinguished service cross hung in his workshop. Chronic nightmares made him scan the sky every morning. Most importantly, he carried absolute conviction about future warfare. The next war would be won or lost in the air. Thomas Fletcher believed this completely. He had trained his daughter the way he wished he had been trained in 1918. His instruction began when she turned 12 years old. Every lesson focused on deflection shooting, using shotguns and clay targets. Hand traps launched targets at varying angles. By age 16, Fletcher could hit targets while standing on a moving truck bed. The motion added complexity that simulated combat conditions. "Leading a target isn't about thinking," her father repeated constantly. "It's about seeing where the target will be. Your shot must arrive there before your brain catches up." Fletcher arrived at Fort Des Moines in Iowa during February 1943. Basic WAC training awaited her there. She had no intention of revealing her shooting abilities. Military regulations were clear to her. Available roles for women were well defined. She was prepared to serve as a mechanic. That prospect genuinely satisfied her. The moment that changed everything occurred during her third week. A gunnery instructor arrived from Tyndall Field for demonstrations. He wanted to show aerial combat tactics to trainees. Both male soldiers and WRC members attended these sessions. The instructor set up a skeet range for practical demonstration. "This is all about deflection," the instructor explained to assembled trainees. He demonstrated the technique of shooting ahead, of moving clay targets. "You don't aim where the target is now. You aim where it's going to be next." Most men take months to develop this instinct. Some never master it at all. He invited volunteers to try the technique. 3 male soldiers stepped forward. All 3 attempted the challenge. Every one of them missed every target completely. The instructor shrugged at their failure. "See how difficult this is? It takes weeks of practice to hit even one target." Fletcher stepped forward from the group. "May I try, sir?" she asked quietly. The instructor glanced at his clipboard. He saw she was WAC and smiled with indulgence. "Sure, miss. Give it a shot." "No pun intended," he added with a chuckle. Fletcher picked up the shotgun with practiced hands. She called for the target with calm voice. The clay pigeon arced across the sky. Her shotgun tracked smoothly. The target exploded into fragments. She called for another target. Another perfect hit. 6 clay pigeons shattered in succession. She never missed once. The range fell completely silent. Even birds seemed to stop singing. The instructor stared at Fletcher with disbelief. Then he looked at scattered target remains across the field. His expression showed pure amazement. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked in a stunned voice. "My father taught me, sir. He was an aerial observer in the last war." The instructor wrote down her name and service number immediately. Within 1 week, new orders arrived. She was transferring to Tyndall Army Airfield for evaluation of specialized skills. The orders came from high enough in command structure that nobody questioned them. At Tyndall, Fletcher entered a 2-week evaluation period. Gunnery instructors wanted to determine if her skeet range performance was genuine ability or lucky accident. They put her through every test in the aerial gunnery program. She excelled at all of them without exception. Stationary range tests came first. Targets sat 600 yards distant. Fletcher grouped her shots tighter than men who had trained for months. Moving target range followed. Cables pulled targets across her field of fire at varying speeds. She maintained accuracy that instructors rarely witnessed. Modified B-24 bombers provided the ultimate test. Training flights over the Gulf of Mexico used towed aerial targets. Real combat conditions existed at altitude. Oxygen masks restricted breathing. Heavy gloves made fine motor control difficult. Freezing temperatures numbed exposed skin. Fletcher achieved hit rates that put her at the top of her class. The problem was simple and impossible. She wasn't supposed to have a class. Women weren't trained as aerial gunners. Period. But once she entered the training program, no regulation explicitly demanded her removal. She simply continued advancing through the curriculum. No one with sufficient authority thought to stop her progress. By August 1943, the 8th Air Force was dying in European skies. Statistics told a terrifying story. Everyone who understood numbers felt genuine fear. Average crew survival rate for bomber missions over German-occupied Europe was 25 missions. Each crew was required to complete 25 missions before rotating home. Mathematics created a horrible equation. Most crews wouldn't survive their tour of duty. Simple numbers demanded this conclusion. The losses at RAF Thurley painted the picture in blood and burning aluminum. Home to the 306th Bombardment Group, Thurley had become a graveyard. July 1943 brought catastrophic losses. The group lost 9 B-17s in a single week. Each bomber carried 10 men. 90 aircrew members had died or been captured in 7 days. The replacement pipeline couldn't maintain pace with casualties. Training a complete bomber crew required 6 months minimum. Creating a skilled aerial gunner demanded 12 weeks of intensive instruction. The 8th Air Force was losing gunners faster than training facilities could produce replacements. Mathematics was working against survival. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Davies managed this crisis without good solutions. He served as operations officer for the 306th Bombardment Group. 3 B-17s sat on hardstands at Thurley. These aircraft couldn't fly combat missions because they lacked full crews. He had pilots available. Co-pilots were present. Bombardiers and navigators filled their positions. Qualified gunners were missing. The B-17F Flying Fortress required 6 gunnery positions. 2 waist guns protected the sides. Ball turret gunner covered the bottom. Tail gunner watched the rear. Top turret gunner protected above. Nose gunner covered the front. Each position demanded specific skills and extensive training. You couldn't hand a rifle to any infantryman and expect combat effectiveness. Aerial gunnery required different abilities entirely. Enemy fighters attacked at 300 miles per hour from varying angles. Gunners wore electrically heated suits and oxygen masks. Altitude reached 25,000 feet. Temperature dropped to -40 degrees. These conditions demanded specialized training. Davies received a telegram from 8th Air Force Headquarters in late August. The message complicated his already impossible situation. A specialist aerial gunner would arrive at Thurley for temporary assignment. The telegram included service number W284719. Either through intentional omission or bureaucratic oversight, no first name appeared. Sergeant Ann Fletcher stepped off the transport truck at RAF Thurley on August 29, 1943. She carried her duffel bag and orders. Ground crew reaction was immediate confusion, followed by barely suppressed panic. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes served as crew chief, who signed for arriving personnel. Hayes looked at Fletcher. He looked at his clipboard. He looked at Fletcher again with growing confusion. "There's been a mistake, miss," he said carefully. "This is a bomber base. The WAC billets are located elsewhere." Fletcher handed him her orders without expression. "No mistake, Sergeant. I'm assigned to the 306th Bombardment Group as an aerial gunner." Hayes read the orders 3 times. He hoped the words would change somehow. They remained exactly the same. He walked Fletcher to the operations office. Lieutenant Colonel Davies experienced a similar sequence of emotions. Confusion came first. Disbelief followed. Then dawning realization struck him. He was facing a problem with no clear solution. Sergeant Fletcher, Davies said carefully, there must be some mistake. Women aren't assigned to bomber crews in any capacity. I'm aware of the regulations, sir, Fletcher replied calmly. I didn't request this assignment personally, but my orders are valid and proper. My gunnery qualifications are documented in my file. Davies opened her personnel file with reluctant hands. The gunnery scores were there, undeniable and exceptional. He made 3 phone calls to 8th Air Force Headquarters. The first 2 calls reached officers who assured him there must be an error. They would look into it immediately. The third call reached a colonel who told Davies something that changed his entire understanding. Davies, this comes from the very top. General Armstrong himself approved this assignment. We're losing this war in the air right now. We're losing men faster than we can train replacements. Fletcher's scores are better than 90% of the gunners we're sending up. If she can shoot accurately, we need her shooting. Figure out how to make it work. Davies hung up the phone slowly. Fletcher stood at attention in front of his desk. Her expression remained completely neutral. Sergeant, do you understand what you're volunteering for? He asked quietly. The life expectancy for bomber crews over Germany is measured in missions, not months. I know the statistics, sir, Fletcher replied without hesitation. I also know you have bombers sitting on the ground because you don't have enough trained gunners. She was absolutely right. Davies had 3 B-17s that couldn't fly for lack of complete crews. He had missions scheduled that he couldn't fulfill. Complete crews simply didn't exist. Mathematics was working against him constantly. For 5 days, Fletcher existed in bureaucratic limbo at Thurley. She was assigned to a barracks building that housed ground crew members. She attended briefings regularly, but wasn't assigned to any specific crew. Male gunners at the base treated her with mixed reactions. Curiosity came from some quarters. Skepticism emerged from others. Open hostility appeared occasionally. The skepticism came from understandable places. Davies recognized this completely. These men were dying at rates that made long-term survival mathematically improbable. They had formed tight bonds with crew members based on absolute trust. Each person had to perform under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Fletcher's presence represented an unknown variable. Any woman, regardless of her qualifications, could potentially get them killed. The bonds between crew members had been forged under fire. She was an outsider being inserted into crew dynamics that had been tested in combat. The test flight that changed everything occurred on September 6, 1943. Davies authorized Fletcher to participate in a training flight aboard a B-17F designated Liberty Bell. The mission was standard practice over English countryside. No combat situations, no immediate risk, just an opportunity to evaluate her actual performance in a real bomber. Aircraft commander was Captain James Thornton. He was a veteran of 14 combat missions. Thornton had made his skepticism about Fletcher's presence abundantly clear to Davies. "With respect, sir," he had said, "my crew has been through hell together. We trust each other with our lives completely. I don't know this person at all." "Consider it a training evaluation, Captain," Davies had replied firmly. "She's going up regardless. Your job is to assess whether she can do what her scores indicate." The flight took off at 0600 hours precisely. For 2 hours, the B-17 flew practice formations with other bombers from the group. Fletcher manned one of the waist gun positions throughout. She went through mechanical drills of clearing jams. Changing ammunition belts required practice. Tracking simulated targets through her gun sight demanded concentration. At 08:15 hours, something occurred that wasn't supposed to be possible during training flights. A German Focke-Wulf FW-190 appeared at their altitude. The fighter was probably lost, or on reconnaissance mission. It made what Thornton later described as either an attack run or the most aggressive close pass I've ever witnessed. The German fighter approached from 4 o'clock high. This was a classic attack angle that gave the FW-190 a significant speed advantage. It dove toward the bomber formation with increasing velocity. The fighter closed to within 800 yards before the top turret gunner spotted it. Warning calls crackled over intercom systems. Fletcher was positioned at the starboard waist gun. She rotated her .50 caliber machine gun to track the incoming fighter. Deflection angle had to be calculated in the split second available. She opened fire with a 3-second burst. Tracer rounds streaked across the sky. The B-17's combat camera ran automatically during all flights. Gun camera footage captured what happened next. Fletcher's tracer rounds converged on the fighter's projected flight path with mathematical precision. The FW-190 flew directly into her stream of fire. No evasive action could save it. The fighter's engine erupted in thick smoke. Black trails streamed behind the aircraft. It rolled and dove away, trailing mechanical destruction. Emergency landing would be required if the pilot survived. Liberty Bell landed at Thurley at 09:47 hours. Captain Thornton climbed out of his aircraft immediately. He walked directly to where Fletcher was exiting through the waist gun hatch. His hand extended toward her. "That was a perfect deflection shot, Sergeant," he said with genuine respect. "Textbook precision. I've seen veteran gunners miss that exact angle repeatedly." Gun camera footage was reviewed by Davies and his operations staff. The deflection angle Fletcher calculated required aiming approximately 30 feet ahead of the fighter's current position. This compensated for the FW-190's speed and the bomber's own motion. She had done this instinctively in less than 2 seconds. No hesitation. No second-guessing. Pure skill. Davies called Fletcher into his office that afternoon. The meeting would determine her immediate future. "Sergeant, I'm assigning you to Lieutenant Raymond Cooper's crew. They're flying a mission tomorrow morning. They lost their starboard waist gunner 3 days ago over Emden. You'll take that position immediately." "Yes, sir," Fletcher replied without expression. "Sergeant Fletcher," Davies continued, "I need to be completely clear about something important. If you fly this mission tomorrow, you'll be the first American woman to fly combat operations in this war. There are people at higher headquarters who will have very strong opinions about that fact. Some of those opinions will not be supportive in any way. Do you understand the implications?" "I understand completely, sir." "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "Sir, those men are dying because they don't have enough trained gunners available. I can do this job effectively. That should be the only thing that matters right now." Davies nodded slowly with growing respect. "In a perfect world, Sergeant, you'd be absolutely right. We don't live in a perfect world, unfortunately. But we do live in one where we're losing this war in the air. I need every qualified gunner I can get. You're qualified beyond question. Go prove it tomorrow, September 3rd, 1943, 04:30 hours precisely." The briefing room at RAF Thurley held 120 men and 1 woman. Target map revealed what everyone had feared when awakened at 400 hours. Stuttgart, Germany, deep in enemy territory, defended by hundreds of anti-aircraft guns and dozens of fighter squadrons. Fletcher sat in the back row of the briefing room. She drew minimal attention deliberately. Same gear as every other gunner. Fleece-lined leather flight jacket. Heated suit connections trailed from her clothing. Oxygen mask hung around her neck. In dim light of the briefing room, she was just another silhouette among many. Major William Hastings served as Group Intelligence Officer. He stood beside the target map. His briefing delivered information that made survival mathematics abundantly clear. Gentlemen, today's target is the Bosch Electrical Works in Stuttgart. This is a maximum effort mission. We're putting up 21 aircraft from this group, part of a 300-bomber strike force. Expected enemy fighter opposition: heavy. Flak concentrations along the route: severe. Hastings paused, looking at assembled crews. The Luftwaffe has been reinforcing their fighter groups in southern Germany. Intelligence estimates we'll face approximately 200 German fighters at various points during the mission. They will focus their attacks during our bomb run. That's when we're flying straight and level. Most vulnerable. Mission planning called for bombers to fly at 25,000 feet altitude. Temperature would hover around -40 degrees Fahrenheit. At that crushing height, any equipment failure could prove fatal. Oxygen systems had to function perfectly. Crews would lose consciousness in minutes without proper oxygen flow. Electrically heated flight suits had to work flawlessly. Exposed skin would suffer frostbite in seconds at those temperatures. Any mechanical failure could mean death before emergency procedures could help. Lieutenant Raymond Cooper's crew gathered around their aircraft at 0530 hours. Pre-flight inspection was critical for survival. The B-17F they would fly bore the name Wild Adventure painted on her nose. 12 bomb symbols represented completed missions. Each symbol meant survival against impossible odds. Cooper was a 23-year-old pilot from Oregon. This would be his 8th combat mission. Statistical analysis suggested he had 17 more missions before rotating home. If he survived that long, mathematics worked against optimism. Fletcher arrived at the aircraft carrying her flight gear. Crew reaction was decidedly mixed. Some had heard about the training flight incident with the FW-190. Others were simply trying to process the reality. They would fly into combat with a woman aboard their aircraft. This had never happened before. Technical Sergeant Paul Anderson served as top turret gunner and crew chief. He pulled Fletcher aside before she boarded the aircraft. "Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but some of the guys are nervous. Not because of you specifically, but because, well, this is completely different. We've never done this before in any situation." Fletcher understood what he wasn't saying directly. These men had trained together extensively. They had flown together through dangerous missions. They had watched other crews die together. Bonds had formed based on shared experience and mutual trust. She was an outsider being inserted into crew dynamics forged under fire. "Sergeant Anderson," Fletcher replied calmly, "I'm not here to make anyone comfortable. I'm here to man the starboard waist gun position. My job is protecting this aircraft from enemy fighters. That's my only concern. If the crew does their jobs and I do mine, we'll all come home safely. That's the only thing that matters right now." Anderson nodded slowly with growing understanding. "Fair enough, ma'am. Welcome aboard Wild Adventure." Takeoff occurred at 0647 hours precisely. 21 B-17s from the 306th Bombardment Group lifted off from Thurley at 30-second intervals. Each bomber carried 10 men. 6 tons of bombs filled the bomb bays. Enough .50 caliber ammunition was loaded to sustain extended combat. Mathematical preparations for survival. Fletcher took her position at the starboard waist gun once the bomber reached cruising altitude. The waist gun position was brutally uncomfortable for 8-hour missions. Gunners stood in open windows with freezing air screaming past at 180 miles per hour. Wind chill dropped effective temperatures far below -40 degrees. The gun itself weighed 84 pounds. Manual tracking and firing were required while wearing heavy gloves and breathing through oxygen masks. Physical endurance was tested constantly. Mental focus had to remain sharp despite extreme discomfort. The formation crossed the English Channel at 07:45 hours. By 08:30, they had penetrated German-controlled airspace over occupied France. Intercom crackled with constant communication between crew positions. Each man reported what he observed in his assigned sector of sky. Vigilance meant survival. At 09:12 hours, the first German fighters appeared on schedule. Tail gunner's voice came over intercom with practiced calm. Fighters, 6 o'clock level. 4 bandits. Looks like BF-109s approaching from the rear. Fletcher rotated her gun to cover her designated sector. She scanned the sky through her gun sight with methodical precision. German fighters typically attacked from rear and side positions. They tried to avoid concentrated defensive fire from bombers' forward-facing guns. Tactical doctrine demanded this approach. The attack pattern the Luftwaffe had perfected was brutally efficient. Fighters approached from the rear at slightly higher altitude. They built up speed in shallow dives. High-speed passes through bomber formations followed. 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns fired in short bursts. Fighters broke away before defensive fire could track them effectively. At 09:18 hours, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 rolled into an attack run from 4 o'clock high, same angle from which the FW-190 had approached during the training flight. Fletcher tracked the fighter through her gun sight. Deflection angle was calculated based on fighter's speed and angle of attack. She waited for range to close to effective distance. Aerial gunnery success depended on fire discipline. Ammunition was strictly limited. Most German fighter attacks occurred at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. At that distance, probability of hitting fast-moving fighters was minimal. Expert gunners waited until range closed to 400 yards or less before firing. The Bf-109 closed to 500 yards. Fletcher kept tracking steadily. Her gun sight led the fighter by approximately 25 feet. This compensated for deflection calculations. At 400 yards, she pressed the trigger. 3-second burst sent approximately 60 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition toward the fighter's projected position. Gun camera footage reviewed later showed her tracer rounds converging on the fighter with deadly accuracy. The Bf-109's left wing erupted in spray of aluminum fragments. Cannon shells and machine gun bullets tore through wing surfaces. The fighter broke off its attack immediately. It rolled away with visible damage to wing structures. Over the next 40 minutes, bomber formation pushed deeper into Germany. Fletcher engaged 3 more fighters during this period. Each time, she demonstrated identical fire discipline and deflection shooting skills. These abilities had put her at the top of her training class. She didn't fire wildly or waste precious ammunition. She waited for clean shots at reasonable ranges. Controlled bursts followed careful aiming. The bomb run over Stuttgart began at 10:47 hours precisely. For 6 critical minutes, bombers flew straight and level at 25,000 feet. Bombardiers synchronized their Norden bomb sights with targets below. During these 6 minutes, bombers were most vulnerable to attack. They couldn't maneuver defensively without disrupting bomb run accuracy. German fighters knew this tactical vulnerability. They concentrated their most aggressive attacks during this window. Maximum damage could be inflicted when bombers couldn't take evasive action. Wild Adventure's bombardier was Second Lieutenant Thomas Wright. He was pressed to the Norden bomb site, making minute adjustments. Accuracy demanded absolute precision. Pilot Lieutenant Cooper held the controls steady, despite flak bursts erupting around them. Black flowers of smoke and shrapnel could shred aircraft in seconds. At 10:51 hours, an FW-190 executed what fighter pilots called a head-on attack. This was one of the most dangerous maneuvers in aerial combat. The fighter approached from 12 o'clock level. directly in front of the bomber. This created closing speed of nearly 450 miles per hour. Both fighter and bomber gunners had only seconds to fire before the fighter flashed past. Fletcher swung her waist gun forward. The mount strained against its limits. She needed an angle on that attacking fighter. Her muscles tensed as she fought the mechanism. The nose gunner opened fire first. Tracers streaked through the thin air. The top turret gunner joined in immediately after. Their weapons chattered in unison. The FW-190's guns erupted with deadly flashes. Muzzle flames danced along its wings. The fighter pilot was committed to this attack run. Fletcher tracked the enemy aircraft through her gun sight. The crosshairs followed its path perfectly. She squeezed the trigger for exactly 4 seconds. Her training took over completely. The fighter rolled hard to the left. It dove away from the bomber formation. Black smoke poured from its engine cowling. Something had definitely connected. Whether her bullets or the combined firepower had done, the damage remained unclear. Combat was too chaotic to sort out individual contributions. But that fighter was clearly wounded. It limped away, trailing that telltale smoke. Wright's voice crackled over the intercom at exactly 10:53 hours. His words were crisp and professional. Bombs away. 6 tons of high explosive tumbled from Valiant Venture's bomb bay. The aircraft lurched upward slightly as the weight dropped away. Below them, thousands of other bombs fell like deadly rain from the entire formation. Cooper immediately banked the heavy bomber to starboard. The long journey back to England was beginning. Every crew member knew the return flight brought its own dangers. Before we continue this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today. And if Fletcher's courage is inspiring you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story is going to blow your mind. The flight home was when bomber crews faced their greatest peril. German fighter pilots understood this vulnerability perfectly. They waited like predators for the returning Americans. The bombers had released their bomb loads completely. This made them significantly lighter than during the inbound journey. The reduced weight created handling problems that exhausted pilots had to manage. Crews were physically and mentally drained after hours at high altitude. The adrenaline rush from combat was fading rapidly. Exhaustion crept through every man aboard those aircraft. Wounded bombers struggled desperately to maintain their assigned altitudes. Damaged engines sputtered and failed. Hydraulic systems leaked precious fluid. Control surfaces responded sluggishly to pilot inputs. At 11:27 hours, approximately 40 minutes after leaving Stuttgart behind, the Luftwaffe struck with devastating force. Bomber crews called it a maximum effort intercept. The Germans threw everything they had at the formation. Intelligence officers would later estimate the attacking force at 75 German fighters. They engaged the bomber formation across a 30-mile stretch of airspace. The battle zone extended over the French-German border region. The attacks came from every conceivable angle simultaneously. This coordinated assault was designed to overwhelm defensive gunners completely. No crew could engage every attacking fighter effectively. Fighters approached from 12 o'clock high in tight formations. Others attacked from 6 o'clock level in loose strings. More came from 3 o'clock low in climbing attacks. The coordination was masterful and terrifying. Defensive gunners had to prioritize targets instantly. Split-second decisions determined who lived and who died. Fletcher's intercom discipline remained absolutely perfect despite the surrounding chaos. She called out every fighter she engaged with precise information. Range estimates flowed from her lips automatically. Results were reported immediately after each engagement. Fighter from 4 o'clock high, 600 yards, engaging now. Her voice remained steady and professional. 3 seconds of sustained fire followed her announcement. Fighter breaking right. Possible hits observed on fuselage. She was already tracking the next target before finishing her report. The starboard waist gun position carried enormous responsibility for aircraft defense. Fletcher owned the entire right side of Valiant Venture. Any fighter attacking from 2 o'clock through 5 o'clock was her problem to solve. The gun itself presented constant mechanical challenges that demanded attention. The Browning M2 fired 800 rounds every minute. Ammunition management became critical during extended engagements. Each ammunition box contained approximately 500 rounds of 50 caliber bullets. That provided exactly 37 seconds of continuous firing time. Fletcher had to make every round count. She changed ammunition boxes 4 separate times during this single mission. The process required temporarily abandoning her defensive position. Each box weighed 35 pounds and had to be manhandled into place. At 11:34 hours, a Bf-109 executed a perfect beam attack. It approached from exactly 3 o'clock level. The fighter flew perpendicular to the bomber's flight path. This created the most challenging deflection shooting problem in aerial gunnery. The fighter moved at 350 miles per hour. It crossed at a 90-degree angle to the bomber's 180-mile-per-hour forward speed. Calculating correct lead required instantaneous mental trigonometry. Most gunners never mastered this complex skill. Fletcher had absorbed the lesson her father taught about instinctive judgment over mathematical calculation. She tracked the enemy fighter through her gun sight carefully. Leading it by approximately 40 feet seemed right. Her father's voice echoed in her memory about trusting instinct. She squeezed the trigger for a sustained 4-second burst. The gun camera captured every tracer round's path. Her bullets converged precisely on the fighter's engine cooling. The Bf-109's propeller separated from the engine in a spray of metal fragments. The fighter rolled inverted immediately and began spinning. 25,000 feet of empty air waited below. Lieutenant Cooper's voice came over the intercom with genuine admiration. "Outstanding shooting, Fletcher. That's a confirmed kill for the record books." The aerial engagement continued for another 18 brutal minutes. German fighters pressed attack after attack against the formation. Fletcher engaged 7 more enemy aircraft during this period. Her engagement ranges varied from 700 yards down to 300 yards. She fired a total of 1,847 rounds. That represented 23% of her total ammunition load. Her fire discipline remained absolutely constant throughout the engagement. Wait for reasonable range before shooting. Calculate deflection based on fighter approach angle. Fire controlled bursts rather than spraying wildly. Assess results immediately after each engagement. Move smoothly to the next target without hesitation. These principles had been drilled into her during training. At 11:52 hours, the German fighter attacks ceased as suddenly as they had begun. Luftwaffe pilots had reached their fuel consumption limits. They had to break off and return to their bases. The bomber formation continued westward over occupied French territory. The English Channel lay ahead, representing safety and home. But the damage assessment revealed the mission's terrible cost. 21 B-17s had taken off from Flea that morning. Only 18 were now returning to England. 3 bombers had been shot down over Germany. Their crews were either killed or captured. Every returning bomber showed some degree of battle damage. Cannon shells had torn through aluminum skin. Flak fragments had shredded control surfaces. Hydraulic fluid leaked from damaged systems. Valiant Venture had taken hits from fighter cannon fire. The tail section showed multiple puncture wounds. flak fragments had peppered the left wing extensively, but all critical systems continued functioning normally. Inside Valiant Venture, the crew conducted their own damage assessment. The ball turret gunner, Sergeant Dennis Miller, had sustained a minor shrapnel wound. A flak fragment had penetrated the turret and cut his left hand. The navigator, Second Lieutenant Howard Klein, methodically counted battle damage. He identified 47 holes in the aircraft's aluminum skin. They ranged from small-caliber bullet holes to fist-sized tears from cannon shells. Fletcher's position showed clear evidence of sustained combat intensity. Spent .50 caliber shell casings covered the waist gun compartment floor. They had accumulated to a depth of 3 inches. The barrel of her Browning M2 glowed cherry red from heat. Sustained firing had brought the metal to near-melting temperatures. The ammunition boxes sat nearly empty beside her position. Technical Sergeant Anderson made his way aft to Fletcher's position. The flight home provided time for crew assessment. He surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. Spent casings crunched under his boots as he approached. Empty ammunition boxes told their own story. The glowing gun barrel spoke of sustained defensive fire. He nodded slowly before speaking through the intercom system. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. Really outstanding performance up there today. That beam attack kill was something special. I've only seen that shot made a handful of times. Most gunners simply can't make that deflection calculation work." At 13:47 hours, Valiant Venture crossed the English coastline. The white cliffs appeared through broken clouds below. Home had never looked more beautiful to the exhausted crew. At 14:23 hours, the bomber touched down on Flea's main runway. It was the 18th aircraft to land safely. Ground crews immediately swarmed around each returning bomber. They counted holes systematically and assessed damage carefully. The repair process would begin immediately. These aircraft had to be mission-ready again as soon as possible. Fletcher climbed out through the waist gun hatch slowly. Her flight suit was completely soaked with sweat. This seemed impossible given the -40-degree temperatures at altitude. Her hands shook slightly from 8 hours of gripping the gun's spade grips. Adrenaline was finally wearing off completely. Her face showed distinctive mask marks, where oxygen equipment had pressed against her skin. Lieutenant Colonel Davies waited on the hardstand as the crew climbed down. He walked directly to Lieutenant Cooper with purposeful strides. His expression remained professionally neutral. "How did your new gunner perform today, Lieutenant?" Davies asked directly. Cooper glanced toward Fletcher before answering his commanding officer. "Sir, she scored a confirmed kill on a beam attack at 11:34 hours. She damaged at least 4 other fighters that I personally observed. Her fire discipline exceeded some gunners I've flown with for months." Cooper paused before continuing his assessment. "She performed her assigned duties completely. That's all that matters when bullets are flying up there." Davies turned his attention to Fletcher with measured deliberation. "Sergeant Fletcher, report to my office at 1600 hours for mission debriefing." The debriefing session at 1600 hours included several key personnel. Colonel Davies attended along with Major Hastings, the unit intelligence officer. Captain Edmund Walsh from 8th Air Force Headquarters had flown in specifically for this meeting. Walsh had traveled from High Wycombe to observe and assess Fletcher's performance personally. This represented significant attention from higher command levels. The gun camera footage was reviewed frame by frame. Every engagement was analyzed in minute detail. The beam attack kill was officially confirmed through visual evidence. 3 damaged fighters were classified as probable kills. These were aircraft damaged severely enough that they likely never reached their home bases. 2 additional fighters were classified as damaged, but probably repairable. Walsh watched the gun camera footage 3 complete times. His expression remained carefully neutral throughout the review process. Finally, he addressed Fletcher directly. "Sergeant Fletcher, I'm going to speak frankly about this situation. When I first learned about this experimental assignment, I had significant professional reservations." He paused to choose his words with obvious care. Those reservations were based on established doctrine, military regulations, and, frankly, assumptions about combat capability. Walsh continued his measured assessment. "The gun camera footage suggests my assumptions may have been incorrect. Your performance exceeded most experienced combat gunners." Another pause followed as he considered his next words. "However, this situation creates a significant problem for the military chain of command. You've just completed a combat mission that Army regulations explicitly prohibit you from flying. You've performed at a level that makes those regulations appear problematic. The question now becomes what happens next with your case." Davies interjected before Walsh could continue further. "Captain Walsh, with all due respect to regulations, I have 3 more bombers sitting on hard stands that cannot fly missions. The reason is simple. I don't have enough properly trained gunners available. Sergeant Fletcher is trained completely. She's proven under actual combat conditions that she can perform the job effectively." Davies leaned forward slightly for emphasis. "I need her flying combat missions. My unit's operational readiness depends on having qualified personnel available." Walsh shook his head slowly in response. "Colonel Davies, the situation isn't that straightforward. This will generate attention all the way to Washington. There will be questions from Congress, from the War Department, from people who believe women shouldn't be anywhere near combat operations." He gestured toward the gun camera footage. "The fact that Sergeant Fletcher performed exceptionally well may not be enough to overcome institutional resistance to change." Fletcher remained silent throughout this entire exchange. She stood at rigid attention while senior officers debated her professional future. Her training demanded silence unless directly addressed. Finally, Davies addressed her directly with clear dismissal. "Sergeant Fletcher, you're dismissed from this meeting. Get some food and proper rest. I'll inform you of any decisions regarding your operational status." September 4th, 1943, 8:30 hours. Fletcher reported to the operations office as specifically instructed. She expected either assignment to another combat mission or transfer orders away from Flee. What she received instead was something nobody had anticipated. Colonel Patterson, the operations officer who had originally reviewed her personnel file, had arrived from 8th Air Force headquarters during the night. He sat in Davies's office holding a telegram. His expression suggested he was dealing with something completely unprecedented in his military experience. "Sergeant Fletcher," Patterson began carefully, "yesterday's combat mission has created unexpected complications at the highest levels. Gun camera footage from multiple aircraft had confirmed her exceptional performance. The intelligence assessment rated her among the most effective gunners in the entire operation. This should have been exclusively good news." Patterson paused while looking at the telegram again. "However, 3 different War Department offices have now become aware of your participation in combat operations. There are serious questions about how this happened, whether existing regulations were violated, and what precedent this participation sets for future policy." He continued with obvious reluctance. "Some very senior officers in Washington are extremely unhappy about this entire situation." Fletcher maintained her military bearing perfectly. "Sir, I followed orders as given. I was assigned to a crew and flew the mission I was ordered to fly." "I understand that completely, Sergeant," Patterson replied quickly. "The problem isn't your performance or your conduct during the mission. The problem is that your performance was too outstanding to ignore or dismiss." He set the telegram down on the desk. If you had been mediocre, this situation might have been quietly swept under the rug as an administrative error. But you scored a confirmed kill and multiple probable kills on your first combat mission. That level of performance will be recorded in official mission records. It cannot be hidden or dismissed as insignificant. Davies leaned forward in his chair. Sir, what exactly is the War Department's official position on this matter? Patterson's answer was troubling. They don't have a clear position yet. That's precisely the problem we're facing. This situation doesn't fit any existing policy framework. Women aren't supposed to be in combat roles, but when one woman enters combat and performs at the highest possible level, what does that mean for existing policy? What Patterson didn't say explicitly, but what Fletcher understood clearly, was that her success threatened fundamental assumptions. These assumptions underpinned the entire military's gender-based policies. If one woman could perform aerial combat duties at an elite level, it raised uncomfortable questions. Why were women excluded from combat roles entirely? The implications were far-reaching. For 3 days, Fletcher existed in complete bureaucratic limbo. She attended required training exercises and maintained her weapons qualifications. She carefully avoided discussing the September 3rd mission with anyone. The other gunners at Flea treated her with newfound respect, but they also showed uncertainty about whether she would fly combat missions again. Everyone was waiting for decisions from Washington. On September 7th, Lieutenant Cooper's crew received orders for another combat mission. The target was Bremen, Germany, scheduled for September 8th. The crew roster specifically included Fletcher's name as starboard waist gunner. The mission briefing on September 8th proceeded normally until Major Hastings announced the target and expected opposition levels. Gentlemen and Sergeant Fletcher, Hastings began, today's target is the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory at Bremen. This is a maximum priority target for the 8th Air Force. The Luftwaffe is currently producing approximately 200 fighters per month at this facility. Our job is to stop that production permanently. The mission launched at 0700 team hours with 22 B-17s from the 306th Bombardment Group. Fletcher took her assigned position at the starboard waist gun. She performed her standard pre-flight checks methodically. Intelligence briefings had suggested even heavier fighter opposition than the Stuttgart mission. Fletcher prepared mentally for what promised to be intense aerial combat. The German defenders exceeded all intelligence estimates. At 0947 hours, as the bomber formation approached Bremen from the north, approximately 100 Luftwaffe fighters rose to meet them. The attacks began at 0953 hours and continued for 37 minutes straight. This represented the longest sustained fighter engagement Fletcher had experienced in combat. The tactics Fletcher had developed during the Stuttgart mission proved effective again. She maintained perfect fire discipline and waited for clean shots at reasonable ranges. Every engagement was called out over the intercom system. By the time the bomber formation reached Bremen at 10:31 hours, she had engaged 11 separate enemy fighters. She had scored observable hits on at least 6 of them. Her ammunition expenditure remained carefully controlled. The bomb run over the Focke-Wulf factory occurred at 10:34 hours. The manufacturing plant was clearly visible from 25,000 feet altitude. It sprawled across several acres of German industrial territory. Anti-aircraft fire was the heaviest Fletcher had encountered during any mission. Flak bursts created a nearly solid wall of explosions around the bomber formation. The sky filled with deadly black puffs of smoke. Valiant Venture's bombardier released bombs at exactly 10:36 hours. Through the bomb bay, Fletcher could see ordnance from other bombers falling toward the target. The factory disappeared beneath a blanket of explosions and smoke. Thousands of pounds of high explosives detonated across the facility simultaneously. Secondary explosions suggested ammunition or fuel storage had been hit. The target was thoroughly destroyed. The return journey featured another 28 minutes of intensive fighter attacks. German pilots pressed their attacks with desperate determination. Fletcher's ammunition expenditure exceeded her first mission significantly. She fired 2,134 rounds in total. Her confirmed kills included 2 Bf-109s and 1 FW-190. 4 additional fighters were classified as probable kills based on observed damage. When Valiant Venture landed at Flea at 14:18 hours, the bomber showed extensive battle damage throughout. The tail section had taken cannon fire that wounded the tail gunner. Sergeant Philip Carson had continued fighting despite shoulder injuries. The left wing showed significant damage from flak fragments. Multiple control surfaces had been holed by shrapnel. But the aircraft had made it home successfully, as had 19 of the 22 bombers that launched that morning. The mission debriefing revealed something Colonel Davies found absolutely remarkable. Valiant Venture had been engaged by more fighters than any other bomber in the formation. Intelligence analysts counted 23 separate attack runs against the aircraft. Yet the bomber had sustained proportionally less damage than many aircraft that had faced lighter opposition. This seemed counterintuitive until the reason became clear. Technical Sergeant Anderson provided his assessment during the crew debriefing session. "Sir, the German fighters were definitely targeting us specifically. We took more attacks than any other aircraft in our formation. But our defensive fire was effective enough that most fighters broke off their attacks early. They weren't pressing their runs all the way in because they were taking too much accurate fire." What Anderson didn't say explicitly, but what everyone understood, was Fletcher's contribution to that defensive effectiveness. Fighters attacking from the starboard side had learned that pressing attacks against Valiant Venture meant facing accurate defensive fire. They faced fire from a gunner who didn't waste ammunition but consistently hit what she aimed at. This reputation was spreading among German fighter pilots. September 15, 1943, Lieutenant Cooper's crew had flown 4 combat missions in 12 days. This represented an unusually high operational tempo, but the 8th Air Force was pushing maximum effort. Autumn weather was approaching rapidly. Each mission had featured Fletcher at the starboard waist gun position. Each mission had seen her add to her tally of confirmed kills and damaged aircraft. The statistics were becoming impossible for anyone to ignore completely. Fletcher's confirmed kill total stood at 5 enemy fighters destroyed. Another 8 were classified as probable kills. 6 more were listed as damaged, but probably repairable. In 4 combat missions, she had fired 7,923 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. Her accuracy rate, measured by percentage of rounds resulting in observable hits, stood at 18%. This accuracy rate was more than double the average gunner's 7% hit rate. More significantly, Valiant Venture had become one of the most successful bombers in the 306th Bombardment Group. Despite being targeted heavily by German fighters on every mission, the aircraft had sustained relatively moderate damage. The bomber had never failed to complete an assigned mission. The crew believed their defensive capabilities gave them a survival edge. That belief was tested severely on September 15th during a mission to Mannheim, Germany. The target was a synthetic fuel plant, critical to the German war effort. The mission briefing warned of expected heavy fighter opposition and severe flak concentrations. The mission launched at 06:45 hours with 24 B-17s from Flea. Fletcher took her usual position and performed her standard checks. She prepared for what had become a familiar routine. Hours of uncomfortable flight would be punctuated by minutes of intense aerial combat. This pattern had become predictable, but never easy to endure. The German fighters appeared at 10:14 hours, much earlier than usual. Intelligence analysts later determined that the Luftwaffe had detected the bomber formation's approach, while still 75 miles from target. This early detection gave German pilots more time and more fuel to engage the bombers. What followed was the most intense aerial combat Fletcher had experienced in her brief but eventful career. Between 10:14 hours and 11:27 hours, 73 minutes of continuous engagement, the bomber formation was under constant attack. German fighters attacked in coordinated waves, with fresh fighters replacing those that had expended ammunition or fuel. Fletcher's intercom discipline began to deteriorate under the incredible pressure. Instead of calling out every engagement in detail, she simply fought. Track fighters, calculate deflection, fire controlled bursts, move to next target. The waist gun compartment filled with spent shell casings that rose above her ankles. The accumulating brass made footing treacherous during combat maneuvers. The gun barrel glowed white-hot from sustained firing. Twice during the engagement, she had to cease fire for 30 seconds. The barrel had to cool enough to continue operating safely. Overheated barrels could explode, killing the gunner. At 10:47 hours, a formation of 6 Bf-109s executed a coordinated attack specifically on Valiant Venture. 3 fighters approached from 6 o'clock level. 2 more came from 4 o'clock high. 1 attacked from 2 o'clock low. The simultaneous multi-angle attack was designed to completely overwhelm the bomber's defensive fire. No crew could effectively engage 6 fighters attacking from different angles simultaneously. Fletcher engaged the 2 fighters approaching from 4 o'clock high. This was her assigned defensive sector. She hit the lead fighter with a sustained burst that ignited its engine immediately. The second fighter pressed its attack despite defensive fire. It closed to within 300 yards before its 20-millimeter cannon shells began hitting Valiant Venture's right wing. Aluminum skin peeled away under the impact. Top turret gunner Anderson engaged the fighters attacking from 6 o'clock. Ball turret gunner engaged the fighter attacking from below. The coordinated defensive fire damaged or destroyed 4 of the 6 attacking fighters, but not before the bomber sustained significant damage throughout multiple systems. Lieutenant Cooper's voice came over the intercom, remaining calm despite their deteriorating situation. "We've taken hits to number 3 engine, shutting it down immediately. Also have damage to the hydraulic system. We're losing altitude gradually. Continue defensive fire. We're staying with formation as long as possible." A B-17 Flying Fortress could fly on 3 engines, but performance degraded significantly. Valiant Venture began dropping behind the main formation. The bomber lost approximately 50 feet of altitude every minute. This was essentially a death sentence in aerial combat. Stragglers attracted German fighters like blood in water attracted sharks. Enemy pilots recognized wounded bombers immediately. The German pilots spotted the wounded bomber at 11:53 hours. 3 FW-190s broke away from attacking the main formation. They turned toward Valiant Venture with predatory intent. They approached from the bomber's most vulnerable angle, 6 o'clock low. The tail gunner's field of fire was severely limited from this attack angle. Defensive options were minimal. Fletcher rotated her waist gun as far aft as the mount would allow. She tried desperately to get an angle on the attacking fighters. The range was extreme, nearly 800 yards. She fired anyway, hoping to disrupt their approach pattern. Her tracers arced toward the fighters, falling short but close enough to force defensive maneuvering. Every second of delay helped. Tail gunner Sergeant Carson, still fighting despite his wounded shoulder, engaged the fighters as they closed to 400 yards. His fire hit the lead FW-190, causing it to break away trailing smoke. The other two fighters pressed their attack with determination. Their cannon shells walked up the bomber's fuselage toward the tail section. Carson's gun fell silent abruptly. His voice came over the intercom, strained with obvious pain. "Tail gun hit hard. I'm wounded worse. Guns completely out of action." With the tail gun disabled, Valiant Venture's 6 o'clock position was defended only by the ball turret gunner. His field of fire didn't cover high attack angles effectively. Fletcher made a decision that violated every protocol she had been taught. She disconnected her oxygen line and grabbed a portable oxygen bottle. The bottle provided 10 minutes of oxygen at altitude. She moved from her starboard waist gun position to the port waist gun. This position offered a better angle toward the aircraft's rear. The move took 40 seconds, during which the starboard side was completely undefended. She reached the port waist gun and plugged in her oxygen line immediately. She engaged the two FW-190s that were setting up for another devastating attack run. The angle was still poor, requiring her to fire almost directly aft. The deflection calculation was nearly impossible because the fighters approached from directly behind. Their relative motion was minimal. She fired a sustained burst of nearly 200 rounds. She walked her fire across the sky until tracers converged on the lead fighter. The FW-190 exploded in midair with spectacular results. Whether she had hit the fuel tank or ammunition storage was irrelevant. The aircraft disintegrated in a massive fireball that caused the second fighter to break away from its attack run immediately. Anderson's voice came over the intercom with genuine admiration. "Outstanding shooting, Fletcher. You literally just saved our tail section and probably our lives." But the bomber's situation remained critical despite this success. Valiant Venture had fallen 2,000 feet behind the main formation. The aircraft continued losing altitude steadily. Number 3 engine was completely shut down and feathered. Damage to the hydraulic system meant that landing would be extremely problematic. Even reaching England was questionable. Lieutenant Cooper's voice remained professionally calm despite their desperate situation. "All crew prepare for possible bailout over occupied territory. We're going to try making it to the Channel. But if we lose another engine, we're not going to make it home. Stand by for further instructions." The 80 bombers that Fletcher helped protect during her 25 combat missions carried 800 men total. Those men returned home safely because defensive gunnery helped keep their aircraft flying. The aircraft survived the most intense aerial combat of the entire Second World War. The mathematics were elegantly simple when analyzed objectively. Skill applied at critical moments saved lives. Gender never entered the equation when bullets were flying at 25,000 feet. Combat reduced everything to basic fundamentals. Could you do the job when it mattered most? Fletcher proved that she could do the job better than most. Her accuracy, discipline, and courage under fire spoke louder than any regulation or policy statement ever could. The men who flew with her understood this truth completely. In aerial combat, competence was the only qualification that mattered. Everything else was just politics and prejudice. Those are two incredible stories waiting for you right on your screen. If Fletcher's courage inspired you, these next stories will absolutely blow your mind. Just click and discover more amazing tales. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming tomorrow. More incredible stories of courage, determination, and extraordinary people doing extraordinary things.